Hello, my name is John Mitchell, and I preach for the Calhoun Church of Christ here in Calhoun, Georgia. Visit us on our website at calhounchurchofchrist.com. That is calhounchurchofchrist.com. If you have any questions about this video, if you would like to sign up for an online Bible correspondence course or have a Bible study with me, then email me, John, at this email address, calhounchurchofchrist@gmail.com. That is calhounchurchofchrist@gmail.com. Last night was a good night for the Calhoun congregation because we started up our Wednesday night adult Bible study in the auditorium again. We had been looking at the life of Christ before the pandemic hit, and then we canceled all of our Wednesday night in-person classes for several months. Last night we started it up again with continuing with our study of the life of Christ, and I started teaching and recording it, live streaming it, and about 5 minutes into the class, the Mevo camera shut down. And so I didn't stop the class and try to fix it. I just went on. But I realized that the people who were watching at home, they were not able to get anything but 5 minutes of the class. And so what I'm doing today in my office is just basically re-recording the lesson. I wish you all could have gotten the live streamed version because there was a lot of good discussion, a lot of good questions, a lot of good comments, but sometimes these things happen. And so what we're going to do is I'm just going to teach the class here in my office, and then I encourage you to tune in on Wednesday nights, or if you are in Calhoun, Georgia, come and be with us in person. We do practice social distancing with masks in the auditorium, so you can come and participate in the class live right there in person. If you want to watch from home, it's 7 o'clock Eastern Standard Time every Wednesday night, so please be a part of it. But let's go ahead and get started. When we had stopped the class before the pandemic hit back in March, we had been going through the life of Christ, and we had gotten up to the point where the wise men had come and visited Jesus as an infant. Um, and so we're going to start, pick up with that narrative where we left off. Now, if you have your Bibles, open them to Matthew chapter 2. We're going to read verses 13 through 18. That's Matthew chapter 2, verses 13 through 18. It says, "Now when they had gone," talking about the wise men, "now when they had gone, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream and said, Get up, take the child and his mother, and flee to Egypt, and remain there until I tell you, for Herod is going to search for the child to destroy him. So Joseph got up and took the child and his mother while it was still night, and left for Egypt. He remained there until the death of Herod. This was to fulfill what had been spoken by the Lord through the prophet, Out of Egypt I called my son. Then when Herod saw that he had been tricked by the Magi, he became very enraged, and sent and slew all the male children who were in Bethlehem and all its vicinity from 2 years old and under, according to the time which he had determined from the Magi. Then what had been spoken through Jeremiah the prophet was fulfilled. A voice was heard in Ramah, weeping in great mourning, Rachel weeping for her children, and she refused to be comforted because they were no more." Now, you'll remember, if of being familiar with the biblical account of the wise men, you'll remember that they came from a country in the east, most likely an Arab country, and maybe Arabia or elsewhere in the Middle East, and they were searching for the Messiah, the King of the Jews. They did not know where to look, so they went to Jerusalem. They were asking around. Herod found out about it. And Herod, the king, the Roman government appointed king, he did not want any threat to his power, and so he told them, well, when you find him, please come back and let me know so that I can go and worship him. But in reality, he was wanting to kill him. And so the wise men find Jesus. They worship him. They give him those very expensive gifts of gold and frankincense and myrrh. And then they were warned by God not to return to Herod, and so they depart and left for their home country by another way. So now in Matthew 2, starting with verse 13, the Lord, he understands that Herod is not going to be pleased. Herod's going to try to kill the child. And so the Lord, through an angel, tells Joseph to basically get out of town, hit before Herod could retaliate. And so that's what Joseph does. He takes his family into Egypt. Probably took him several weeks, a month or so to get there. Um, again, Matthew brings out here that this was to fulfill an Old Testament prophecy about the Messiah. Out of Egypt I called my son. And so Jesus would have gone into Egypt to fulfill that prophecy. Joseph, he does not hesitate. He goes and fulfills what God had told him to do. Um, Probably settling in the Nile region, maybe Alexandria region of Egypt, because there was a lot of fertility there. We do not know how long Joseph and Mary and Jesus stayed in Egypt. Remember, they were not planning to make such a long trip. They had traveled to Bethlehem originally just to participate in the census that the Roman government was requiring all Jews to do. Then they would have had to have stayed in Bethlehem for a little bit while Mary recovered from the ordeal of bearing Jesus through childbirth. Um, so they probably were planning on staying in Bethlehem for a while, but they definitely were planning on going to Egypt and staying there for, who knows, several weeks, maybe even months. Uh, how did they survive? One of the things I brought out in the class was that they survived possibly because Joseph found some work as a carpenter. But again, remember those very expensive gifts of gold and frankincense and myrrh that the wise men had given the family right before they had to take off for Egypt. Um, I brought out how this was an example of God providentially providing to make sure that his son and his son's family would survive. Now, Herod, of course, Herod is very, very angry when the wise men do not return and give him the location of this purported king of the Jews. He is paranoid. He does not want any rivals to his throne, even if they are small infant children. And so, probably due to mental illness, uh, he just decides to have all baby boys in the area of Bethlehem killed from age 2 year old and under. That's probably due to the time that he had determined that the child was born, due to the wise men. Now, Bethlehem is not a large town. It's a village at this time, and so the number of children that would have been killed, probably anywhere from 12 to 50. It's still a tragedy, still an abomination, a horrible act. I just cannot imagine. I'm a father. I'm a parent. I cannot imagine sitting there in my home with my family, minding my own business, and holding perhaps my infant child that was born maybe last week, maybe a couple months ago, maybe a year ago, and then suddenly the door is kicked in, soldiers come in, they take the child right out of my arms. My wife, the child's mother, is screaming, and I have to watch them murder the child right in front of me. No reasons given, no reason why this would happen. It was truly a horrible, horrible act. Now, you'll see here that this also was in fulfillment of prophecy. Matthew brings out that this was in fulfillment to a prophecy given by Jeremiah. A voice was heard in Ramah, weeping and great mourning, Rachel weeping for her children, and she refused to be comforted because they were no more. One of the things I brought out in the class last night was that Rachel is interesting that she is brought up. Rachel, of course, would be the mother of Joseph, not Joseph, the husband of Mary, but rather the Old Testament Joseph, Jacob's son, the man who wore the coat of many colors. Rachel was Jacob's favorite wife. She was barren until the Lord finally allowed her to have children. She gave birth to Joseph, and then she gave birth to another son, Benjamin, and she died while giving birth to him. She died in childbirth. Where she died ended up being the place where Bethlehem, the village, the city of Bethlehem, would end up becoming. And so Bethlehem would always be associated with Rachel. And that's why Jeremiah, in prophesying about this atrocity that would happen to the children in Bethlehem, that's why he refers to Rachel and calls basically Bethlehem Rachel. Rachel was associated with Bethlehem because that is where she died. Now, we got into a discussion last night over the question, oh, why didn't God protect all of these babies in Bethlehem the same way he had protected Jesus? Several reasons were given in the discussion. Remember, God made us free moral agents. He did that out of love because real love requires that we be given the freedom to make our own choices. So God allowed Herod to be Herod. God allowed you and me to be the way that we are. But with the ability to make choices, we make bad choices a lot of times. Herod obviously made a terrible choice here, but he had the free will to do so. Um, so it was a good discussion on that last night. Let's continue reading Matthew chapter 2, verses 19 through 23. Matthew chapter 2, verses 19 through 23. But when Herod died, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt and said, Get up, take the child and his mother, and go into the land of Israel, for those who sought the child's life are dead. So Joseph got up, took the child and his mother, and came into the land of Israel. But when he heard that Archelaus was reigning over Judea in place of his father Herod, he was afraid to go there. Then after being warned by God in a dream, he left for the regions of Galilee and came and lived in a city called Nazareth. This was to fulfill what was spoken through the prophets, he shall be called a Nazarene. So at some point later, Herod dies, and an angel comes to Joseph and basically gives Joseph the direction to leave Egypt, go back to Israel with Mary and Jesus. Uh, Herod, everyone who sought to kill the child, they are dead. And so Joseph goes back. Apparently, he goes to Judea. He might have intended to go back to Bethlehem, but then he hears that Herod's son, Archelaus, is on the throne, and Archelaus has a reputation of being just as sadistic and cruel as his father was, and so they avoid Judea and they travel north to Galilee and their hometown of Nazareth. By this point, it's been more than a year since they had left Nazareth to go to Bethlehem, but now they're back. And again, the return to Nazareth was also part of God's plan because the Old Testament prophecy about the Messiah was that he would be called a Nazarene. So, in the life of Christ, what we do is we go through the life of Christ in this class in chronological order. And so we're going to be leaving the book of Matthew and going over to the book of Luke. So let's go to the Gospel of Luke, chapter 2, and we're going to start reading with verse 40 and go through the end of the chapter. And we'll discuss verses 40 through 52, and then that will be it for this particular class. So Luke chapter 2, verses 40 through 52. It says, The child continued to grow and become strong, increasing in wisdom, and the grace of God was upon him. Now his parents went to Jerusalem every year at the feast of the Passover. And when he became 12, they went up there according to the feast. And as they were returning after spending the full number of days, the boy Jesus stayed behind in Jerusalem. But his parents were unaware of it, but supposed him to be in the caravan, and went a day's journey. And they began looking for him among their relatives and acquaintances. When they did not find him, they returned to Jerusalem looking for him. Then after 3 days they found him in the temple, sitting in the midst of the teachers, both listening to them and asking them questions. And all who heard him were amazed at his understanding and his answers. When they saw him, they were astonished. And his mother said to him, Son, why have you treated us this way? Behold, your father and I have been anxiously looking for you. And he said to them, Why is it that you were looking for me? Did you not know that I had to be in my father's house? But they did not understand the statement which he had made to them. And he went down with them and came to Nazareth, and he continued in subjection to them. And his mother treasured all these things in her heart. And Jesus kept increasing in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and men. One of the things that I brought out in the class last night that's interesting here about verse 40 is that Jesus was fully God, but he was also fully man. He was also fully a man, a human being. Um, that's a concept that's hard for us to wrap our minds around, but it is true nonetheless. And so, being a fully man, a human being, he would physically grow, just as all children grow. And that's why verse 40 says that the child continued to grow and become strong. It says that he increased in wisdom. Now, being fully God, you would think that the infant Jesus would have all knowledge and all wisdom right off the bat, but he was also fully human, and so he would have to uh, grow in knowledge and wisdom just like the rest of us. Remember in Philippians chapter 2, verses 6 and 7, it says that Jesus, being in the form of God, that Jesus emptied himself by becoming human. But by emptying himself, or some translations say making himself nothing, then that would mean that he emptied himself of some of his divine prerogatives, such as being all knowing. And therefore, the reason he did that was so that he could experience everything that human beings experience, which is something that the Bible also says. He was tempted in all ways as we are, yet without sin. Hebrews chapter 4, verse 15. Now, I find it interesting here that that Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, their purpose here is not to compose a biography of Jesus um, from the time of his birth to when he's 30 years old and starts his ministry. Only Luke records anything that took place during that time period, and even then, all Luke does is bring out just a few things about Jesus' growth and gives only one incident in Jesus' childhood when Jesus was 12 years old. I mean, we would like to know more. I would like to know more. I'd like to know about how uh, Jesus got along with his brothers and sisters when they were born and they were children and siblings together. But God only decided that we need to know only one thing out of Jesus' formative years, and that was when something that happened when he was 12 years old. Now, being a Jewish boy, age 12 is significant. It's a milestone because that's when Jewish boys began to learn a trade. They were called a son of the law, referring to the law of Moses, starting at age 12. At age 12, they left the women and children's area of the synagogue, and they were allowed to sit with the men in the main room in the synagogue. And that's when they also began to observe the major feast of Judaism, and that's what's happening here. Mary and Joseph, when he's 12, they take him to Jerusalem to observe the Passover. They spend the entire week there observing the Passover, and then they're on their way home. And while they're on their way home, suddenly Joseph and Mary realize that they can't find Jesus, that he had stayed behind in Jerusalem. So they go back to Jerusalem. I'm sure, being a parent, that they were panic stricken. I know that I would be. And it takes them 3 days to find them. I mean, I can't imagine the stress and the worry that they were under. But verses 46 and 47 of Luke chapter 2 brings out that after 3 days, they finally found him. He's in the temple. He's sitting in the midst of the teachers, listening to them and also asking them questions. And all who heard him were amazed at his understanding and his answers. Now, it's easy for us to misinterpret this scene. A lot of people will teach this as if 12-year-old Jesus is actually the teacher here, and all of the regular teachers, the scribes and everything, that they were sitting at his feet and he was teaching them. But that's not what was happening. Typical religious classes of that time period would have both teachers and students asking each other questions and answering each other's questions as well. And so Jesus was not the teacher of the class; he was a participant in a class. Why were they amazed? It says they were amazed at his understanding and his answers. The reason they were amazed was because here you have a 12-year-old boy, and this 12-year-old has a very unusual grasp of spiritual principles, and he shows a lot of interest in spiritual matters, and that amazed them. I mean, I would be amazed too if I came across a 12-year-old who was very, very knowledgeable of the Bible, and took the initiative to discuss spiritual matters with me. It gives us a good indication of Jesus's, even at that age, Jesus's interest in his father's business, as it were. Now, when they find Jesus, Mary, of course, acts like any other mother would be. She's relieved and frustrated at the same time. She says, "Son, why have you treated us this way? Your father and I have been anxiously looking for you." Jesus' reply in verse 49 seems to be genuine puzzlement. He says, "Why is it that you were looking for me? Did you not know that I had to be in my Father's house?" Right here, these are the first words of Jesus that are recorded in the Bible. Did you know that? Literally in the Greek, what he was saying was, "I must be in the things of my Father." Now, what those things aren't specified. A lot of translations say, "I must be about my Father's business." That's the way the King James puts it. Um, Hugo McCord's translation has it, "I must be about my Father's affairs." Um, New American Standard says, "I must be in my Father's house," which to me, contextually, is probably the better translation, considering that they did find him in the temple. The temple was considered to be the house of God. Um, but notice what Jesus says here. We discussed this last night in the class too. He says, "I must be about my Father's business." Did this insight that he was God's son, the only begotten Son of God, did this insight, how did he get this insight at age 12? Was it at age 12 that he got it, or did he get it earlier? Was it just a sudden realization, or was it something that came upon him gradually due to his own studies? When he was 12 years old, did he fully comprehend everything that God would have him do as the Messiah, or did he only have a partial understanding at that time? There's no way we can know any of these things with certainty. But one thing we can say is that Jesus, being 12 years old, was well on his way to becoming the man that God wanted him to be. Now, you look at the next verse, verses 51 and 52. It says, "He went down with them and came to Nazareth, and he continued in subjection to them." So, for the next 18 years or so of Jesus' life, this is really all we know. Um, that he continued to obey his parents. And you would think, being the Son of God, that he wouldn't have to obey Mary and Joseph, but that's what God wanted him to do. One of the commandments, the 10 Commandments: honor your father and mother. Paul would bring out, obey your parents. Um, that's something that God wants us all to do, and Jesus definitely would have done that. There's a lot about Jesus' childhood and his early adulthood that we do not know. The scriptures give some hints at it. He probably didn't have a good relationship with his siblings, at least starting out, because we're going to see in this class that at the beginning of his ministry, his younger brothers did not believe in him. Uh, we know that he, being the oldest, according to Jewish tradition, um, being the oldest, that when Joseph died, he would have taken on the trade of of being a carpenter. He would have been the source of the primary income for his family at that point. Um, he probably was not educated formally. You can almost guarantee that he was in regular attendance at the synagogue, but probably did not have any sort of formal education. But what we do know is found in Luke chapter 2, verse 52. It says that Jesus kept increasing in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and man. He kept on increasing. In the Greek, that's a continual thing. He never stopped. He continued to grow in these areas. He grew in mental development, in wisdom. He grew in physical development. He grew in stature. He grew socially because it says he was in favor with men, but also he grew spiritually as well. He was in favor with God. So that's the class that we had last night. Again, I'm sorry that the camera failed on me, and so I had to record this again in my office, and so you missed out on the discussion. But Lord willing, next Wednesday night, 7 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, this will be successfully live streamed, and we will continue this class. What we will be looking at next week, Lord willing, is the ministry of John the Baptist as described in Matthew chapter 3, Mark chapter 1, and in Luke chapter 3. So be reading those chapters, and Lord willing, we will see you then. Thank you very much for watching. Again, my name is John Mitchell. I'm the preacher here at the Calhoun Church of Christ. Visit us on our website at calhounchurchofchrist.com. And if you have any follow-up questions or would like to get in contact with me, email me at calhounchurchofchrist@gmail.com. May God bless you.